right, and welcome back to The Brass and the Truth. On today's episode, we're going to get into, the Judge Advocate General Corps, or JAG, what it is, what they do, what they don't do, and some of the recent controversies about the hirings, firings, and changes in the political landscape. Redleg, what do you take JAG to mean, and what do you know that they do?
JAG, when you first hear them, you would think these are your lawyers. No matter any type of legal circumstances, they're the ones that will handle the matter. They'd be ranging from a football, which is basically if an item goes missing, they would do an investigation on what happened to it, to an Article 15, which is basically a non-judicial punishment, all the way up to a court martial. But that's not the complete case of what a JAG does, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Foremost job of a JAG is to be an advisor to a commander, all the way from down to brigade commander, all the way up to the Secretary of the Army. Now, they do have several different responsibilities. Besides that, you do have JAGs that will do what is called SJA, which is staff. What would you say it was again? I always forget that one.
Staff judge advocate, the guys who sit in convening court martials for whichever command structure they're a part of, and further advise the CG.
Yeah, so there's those, and then there is a post SJA that you can go to get any type of legal advice. This is giving a will done, getting like domestic legal advice, like divorce or whatever. We'll get more in details on that stuff. And then trial defense, which is another thing we'll go into more detail. They're the guys that you go to for a defense attorney. So they have quite a bit of different responsibilities. But again, their foremost responsibility is being a legal advisor to commanders and to the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of Navy, and so on.
Yeah, so the key point here is that all of the JAG officers are lawyers, right? Obviously, there's people within SJA that are, warrant officers, enlisted soldiers that aren't lawyers and that, assist with paperwork, admin, facilitation, etc. These individuals are not the ones making the policy recommendations or reviewing the legality of. Now, that's not to say that they've never sat in and read, state regulations, the military manual for court martial, etc., and helped out a JAG. But generally speaking, the JAG officers of the JAG Corps are educated JD or higher lawyers that have entered military service with the intent of interpreting, defending, or prosecuting law within the service. Now, I say interpreting, defending, and prosecuting because at different stages, JAGs will do all of that, right? So my experience with JAG is a little bit more fleshed out as an MP, but not so much so that I can speak expertly to them. I'll say the JAGs that I've dealt with typically don't have as much time in one area or another as they go up. Because as with all things in the military, we move positions quite frequently. Now, the further you go down the line, and it's not just moving positions, moving posts. So they got to learn a new commander, a new state regulation, a new, this, that, the other. So there's lots that they have to change up each time they move around for just the Army in general. But one thing that may frustrate a lot of young soldiers and airmen and sailors, if they don't know this, is typically the defense attorney for soldiers is the most junior lawyers within the JAG Corps. Typically, JAGs start out at captain. There's a direct commissions and or their bullet that kind of accelerates them into that. There's, to my knowledge, not very many first lieutenant or second lieutenant JAGs, if any.
Yeah, I don't think there's any second lieutenants. Now, I have met a lieutenant JAG. I have met one. I'll make note of that.
Oh, yeah. So, and that's good to know because it's got to be rare, but it's got to also be possible. But yeah, those most junior are typically the defense attorneys, which I guess fits the public defender mindset.
Mhm.
But then you get, after that, can become prosecutors. They can become, SJA advocates for the commanders or whatnot. And as they continue on, they'll get to points where they can become judges within the service to convene court martials for the post, for the commander, for different commands above. What brings us kind of to our talk about controversy, though, is obviously the firing right now of multiple high level JAG officers and some outcry from different political components saying that firing some of these JAGs, there are members of the current leadership that are trying to break laws or find people that will, submit to their will and not uphold the law. And I think maybe they've got it a little backwards. I specifically read, I think you have one by Dr. Waltman Bjorn saying that our vice
Yeah.
president doesn't know what JAG is.
Yeah. So a little backstory on this individual. So he was an infantry officer commissioned from West Point. He is now a history professor over in England. I will not disclose the university. You have to find him on X, and he will have a link to his page there. That's where you can find his university. I will not dox him that away. He did serve in the invasion of Iraq. I'm going to go post on the uniform because he posts quite a bit of his time in Iraq. But what he specifically says in the post is our vice president is apparently unaware of the existence of JAG and the military lawyers who do, in fact, tell generals which orders are legal. That is not completely true. They, as we said, advise the commanders what is legal, but the commanders can always disregard that as anything. Commanders don't always have to take the advice of anyone. That's something they teach you in ROTC, teach you Bullet, Triple C, everywhere. Just because someone tells you, hey, sir, you maybe should do this, or this is immoral, or this is unlawful, whatever, commander can still do it. That doesn't mean that they will not suffer the consequences, obviously. But that's because Jack says, sir, that is illegal. Does not mean that commander will say, oh, crap, I can't do it then. Commander can still do it. Now, obviously, the MPs will come knocking and arrest him for committing a war crime or whatever. But I just got to say a little bit about this professor because this guy's been going on a full rant quite a bit recently because of the administration. If you look at his current profile, he has the flag upside down. But this individual is, again, he's a history professor. Well, be blind by the fact that he's prior service. He's very much been indoctrinated by the history department, the academia of history, because I've spent several semesters in the history grad department, and this is pretty much how any history professor talks and behaves. If you look at anything that he says, this is not a reflection of officers in the military. This is very much a reflection of history professors. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I think
It's just best to know what he says. He likes to flaunt. Like, I was in the military. I know what I'm talking about type stuff. He likes to do that too. So
yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting thing that we see is, the military has employed millions upon millions of people, and of them all, we come out and we see so many of them turn to this very left leaning side on social media, and
particularly on the officer side, I would say
right,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and it confuses the heck out of me because when we're in service, there were people of varying political opinions, left, right,
Mm-hmm.
center, wackadoos. I mean, everyone existed. And this is later, we'll talk about diversity a little bit. The military is so diverse, but the
Mm-hmm.
voices I think I hear most and get put out on the news outlets as the experts, they're always these left leaning guys who have the most abysmal view of America and think that
Mm-hmm.
we're the worst empire in the history of the world. And it's like, guys, we're really not that bad. Like, don't get me wrong, America's done some pretty messed up stuff, but just in the grand scheme of things, we're not this absolute homogeny of corruption that everyone thinks we are. We're not the bad guy in everyone's stories. And the Judge Advocate's Corps has been allowing for very loose interpretations over the past couple of years with all of the DI mandates and whatnot, because they can, right? Interpretation of law is limited only to the language within the law, regulation, or statute. If the law is as vague as you must recruit within these 7 categories
Hmm.
without discrimination, then if you change other language to say, oh, well, this fits into this category now, then that falls into it. The language of law and statutes are so finite that it can't adapt actively to the scenario and to the changes of society. We
Hmm.
require the interpretation of laws by JAG to assist in navigating those waters, because there's no way you can sit down and write regulations to meet every potential scenario in the future. This means that if one person's interpretation is different than the other, that doesn't inherently make them somebody trying to bend the law to their will. Everyone's doing that. Everyone ever is doing that. And so having one group say, well, you're just trying to bend the law to your will. It's like, well, so were you. So was the previous administration and the one before that and before that. So where do we draw the line at? Well, you can't
Hmm.
fire everybody because they don't agree with you. Maybe these guys just sucked at their job or allowed leadership to get away with things that they shouldn't have. Maybe they didn't enforce policies. I mean, Red, do you want to talk about the admiral that, said he was going to continue to utilize DEI practices in his recruiting?
Yeah, so I understand that is your view that DEI should exist. And okay, sure, you could be all for that. You can advocate for the stuff. But there has been a memorandum put out by the Secretary of Defense that DEI will not exist in the military. First, you're a high ranking officer in the military. Second, you are a JAG officer in the Navy. You have to enforce the memorandum put forward by the Secretary of Defense. Even if you don't agree with it, you have to do it. That is something that they teach you at your commissioning source. No matter who is in office, no matter who is your superior, as long as it's lawful and moral, you have to follow those orders. And you can dispute whatever you want that is immoral or whatever, but it's not lawful because of the fact that it's been made law by executive order, and no one has truly found a way to challenge it so far. But for the time being, you need to abide by the policy. And you learn that uniform is, as they say, you have to basically preach what the military tells you. Outside of the uniform, you can say whatever you want. That is part of the problem. A lot of these senior ranking officials, once they get to a certain rank, they feel like they can just say whatever they want. But if they will say a junior officer, like a lieutenant, if they were to say this stuff, they would have just been persecuting them for it. So this is a double standard.
Yeah. And those double standards exist everywhere. And just for example, so I there was talking about Admiral Root, RUGH, and we can get further in that one maybe a little later. But just this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
I went to an event, met I believe he's a colonel, who in his chain of command, they got the email from Doge or whatever, right? Talking about what are the 5 things you did last week. And there was guidance put out by the chain of command at Fort Leavenworth about not answering the email. And
Yeah, that's been an ongoing thing. Even DoD has been saying to disregard it.
so here's my thing. If DoD put out a message, or the chain of command at this post or that post put out a message saying don't comply with something put out by the executive branch,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be straight from the president's email, whether it be from one of his cabinet members, if it was authorized by the president, the commander in chief, and it's not unconstitutional, These
Mm-hmm.
guys are literally disobeying direct orders and subverting the command of our highest leader within the military structure.
Mm-hmm.
That is, for some members, borderline treason. And we're talking about an email asking about 5 things you did last week. This is super simple stuff. There's no
Mm-hmm.
left right to read on this. Oh, where in the Constitution does it say I can't do this? Nowhere. Nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to go into the first professors like, oh, they're just, they don't know what JAG is and they're firing people because they're trying to, get them to do what they want. Prime example of someone doing something outside of the scope of their job. Because, I mean, unless you're super secret squirrel and you can't disclose what you do in a unclass email,
Mm-hmm.
that's an order that JAG should have been like, yes, Commander, you don't have a choice. Tell your people to reply.
Yeah, they've been saying it's because they could be working on something that's top secret, which makes sense. I mean, I understand you can't disclose that information, but write something that's not top secret. I
Right? I
mean,
hope you did 5 other things besides top secret stuff.
yeah, I mean, for what Elon Musk said and what has been put out by the press secretary and by President Trump is anything, just anything. This to show that you exist and that you're actually doing something. It doesn't matter what, just anything. But I mean, we're getting a little political, but yeah, it is.
Well,
The first off,
the thing is, it's an order.
they,
It's an order,
it's older, but
political or not.
the thing is, this happens in the military anyways, and usually that happens to the officer that the commander doesn't trust and thinks that it's not doing anything, and he's, hey, what if you rate 5 to 10 things that you have done for me, and have it at my desk by the end of the week, because he
Right,
doesn't
and
think he does anything.
that's not like it. As an example, we look at that, we're like, okay, this is a ridiculous, like, and I'm not trying to straw man my way out of, like, clearly the previous guys are bad, but it's just another example. You go to COVID and the enforcement of that and the kicking people out and not allowing for religious exemptions. And so we've had vaccines for, how long? Near 100 plus years. Like, we clearly.
I think the first time, if I'm right, was initiated after the Spanish flu. The,
Right? Like,
the medical corps was created after the Spanish American War, but they started to really mandate the stuff after the Spanish flu.
So like there's a huge historical precedence on vaccines. Devil's advocate, they're a good thing. Vaccines are generally supporting the force in staying healthy and avoiding major debilitating diseases and whatnot. What did the JAG Corps do during COVID so badly that we couldn't figure out a legal left right?
Mm.
And to wit, like, how many command teams, how many officers were roasted on the stake because they didn't agree with JAG at this post or that post, or they fought. Like, the JAG Corps is not all powerful.
Mm-hmm.
They don't make or break laws, but they can also supplement, these amazing snafus like COVID.
Yeah, and if JAG had the kind of authority that this professor claims that they do, then the JAG would have been able to intervene and put a stop to that mandate if what we believe was to be true about it being unlawful. Obviously, they didn't. Now, that a lot of it could be is that a lot of JAG officers were involved in what some people will say the conspiracy, but it can also be it's because they don't have that type of power, which they don't. They don't have the power to be able to say, you can't do that, sir. I mean, all they can say is, by the way, you're not able to do that, but it's your decision.
Right. So I just when we talk about JAG like this, we're obviously talking in a very general way. It's not like the whole Corps is geared this way, and that's because guidance will be pushed out by the head of JAG, and the Judge Advocate General is some general at some level that says, all right, this is what we collectively think about this. And then each post is going to, case by case, apply that guidance or not apply that guidance if it doesn't fit the narrative.
Mhm.
And so I want to dial back on some of my rhetoric here and be like, just because these high level JAGs are being fired does not mean that we're going to see immediate relief in every post and every decision and every court martial. There's going to be colonel level JAGs, or maybe one major level JAGs that are adjudicating these cases, or advising commanders in locations, and you're still going to have some discrepancy from post to post to post. In some of those high level cases where admirals, generals are not complying with, or there's that gray area of like, well, they said they're still going to use this language, or they're still going to implement, this style of leadership, that may not immediately hit the policy letter or the effective memorandum or regulation that gets put out,
Mhm.
and they may be allowed to continue that. And so we'll probably see in the next couple months cases to discuss.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's probably gonna be more firings. And then you probably will have some investigations. We'll have to see. You definitely see a lot of people in the military, especially veterans, that are pushing for all this stuff, and that's part of what is very annoying for someone who did spend time in the military. Seeing a lot of individuals, not gonna say which side of the political spectrum, but those who didn't serve on that political spectrum, saying like all these people have done fantastic work in the military with high honors and all this other stuff, and they're being fired and all this, and it's like because they were a four-star general with 30 years, that makes them a highly decorated individual. Maybe check and see how long it actually takes to get to that rank and what is needed to make to that rank. Because to make it to 1 star, you just need 20 years of service and get approved by Congress. That's all you need to do. And just to break the laws first, all you gotta do is kiss people's ass as an officer. It's literally all you gotta do. It's not that difficult. Trust me. Go join the military. Go become an officer. You will see some of the worst officers you will ever meet. Just kiss ass, and they'll make their ranks. It's not that hard. But much needed cleanup with some senior ranking officers. Just because they have a big shiny star on their shoulder does that mean they're a fantastic officer. We had a couple division commanders where I was at that were not well liked. I'm not going to say what some of the things that soldiers were saying, what officers were saying, but they were not well liked. I would say that a lot of people were saying one of the commanders was stupid. That
So
partly is because he had his total a 1-5, not 1-5, a 1-1-9er artillery piece a mile down the street for a PT exercise. In a couple of people broke legs. I think that he ended up becoming a 1-star general. So I think you could figure out if that's intelligent or not.
wait, hold on. He had them twirl a.
Like push,
Oh,
push. Like he had to pick up and push this 119 howitzer down the street for a mile.
is that like just devil's advocate? I'm not sure how heavy that is, but it's on wheels. That's not heavy at all to push, right?
Needs 6 people to be able to pick it up.
Right, but it was on wheels.
It's on wheels. It's 2 wheels, but it's 6 men to actually properly pick it up and push it. But it's not meant to be pushed for a mile,
Yeah, so
half a
I'm just
mile
thinking
to
to
a
myself,
mile.
that's not even good PT, to be honest. It's like
No,
this
but the thing
this
is,
is
again, we had 3 people that got hurt. One guy that broke his femur in half and got to get. I mean,
oh
he had to get medically discharged from the military because of it.
oh heck yeah.
we,
We
we all the time was telling him like, sir, we should not do this. He's like, no, it'd be great.
functional
So
fitness.
it's
Well,
again, this is right before he pinned on a star. He had to go around apologizing because a lot of people got hurt. But again, this is just to show that just because you have a star does not make you a smart, great leader.
I don't think anybody should assume that anyway. In the same way that you shouldn't
But there are
assume that. Oh no, I know. That's indicative of just a misunderstanding of structure. The news is always going to be like, "Oh, look, they're this rank. They're highly decorated. They've been in this many years." It's like, yeah, well, I could put a turd in a backpack, seal it up, and have you open it in 20 years and it's still gonna smell,
It's not me just
Yikes.
trying to be rude or anything. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
there's a lot of things that people who never served or have family members that did serve, they need to learn. Like they can't just go around acting like they're a know-it-all about the military and they never went and done the research themselves and say like this person served 30 years, they must be a great leader. You can't just go out and fire them. It's like maybe
I
go
want to
out
be
and do
like,
some of your research and
I want
figure
to
out
ask
if
them, have they ever been to the DMV? Because there's some people there that have worked for 30 years that, let's be real. Did you just compare a generalship to working at the Yeah, yeah, I did. Because let's be real, bureaucratic people that want to stay in the government that long, it
yeah, I mean
got to
you know
question.
them too. You know those full bird colonels. Once you make it a full bird, the only way you can pin on a star is not by term of service or anything. You have to get approved by Congress. Just listen, meet any colonel. Most of the time, they sound like politicians, and they're going to. And they're going to gather you around and give you like a big old political speech and everything. They end up turning like into a politician. Just for all you, those who are going to listen to this. They are. When military people say generals or politicians, they're not lying to you. Because they have to turn into a politician to be
It's a
able to move
necessary
up the
evil
ranks.
for some of them.
Yeah.
There's no major war. War fighters aren't being promoted into general roles for the most part because
Mm-hmm.
while having a racked and stacked chip, like look at General Milley, right? He's
Yeah.
got medals up the hoo ha, but how many of
Well,
those,
what special forces?
right?
I
And,
mean,
and
that
so like
happens.
some of these guys truly did serve, right? They were in those roles, and hey, I can't speak to what they accomplished because let's be honest, when they did, they were in his case tip of the spear, special forces, right? But
Mm-hmm.
after a certain point, almost all officers become the desk jockeys, right? The guy
As soon as
who
you meet major.
yeah, the guy who's about to be my father-in-law, like he made colonel and he hated the bureaucracy and the politics of it. But I know at a certain point he stopped getting to be the infantry sniper. Like he was a sniper as an enlisted guy. Like the guy was awesome. Enjoyed that. Got to do that for a very long time, even after. But there was a point when he
Mm-hmm.
had to sit back at a desk and become the paper pushing guy. And he got out for political reasons within just the army set, political. But it happens to all of them. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
major conflict and wars. Like even during GWAT, we know that generals throughout the 20 plus years that we spend in the Middle East got promoted not for their warfighting capabilities. Maybe they did at one point have that, but then lost that and gave up for the political side. And they hit the crossroad and they said, all right, instead of focusing on warfighting, training, and lethality, buzzword, I'm going to play the game, move up as much as I can, get that really sweet paycheck, and then go join a Raytheon board,
You know, part of it is so too because of the way how DC turned the war on terrorism for these generals to get what they needed to be able to win the war. They need to become a politician. They had to go out there and get their big political speech and all that to be able to get the money, the weapons, and all this other stuff that they needed. So because of the way how DC turned the war into it, it basically made it political. I mean, it wasn't like World War II or the Korean War or any of that.
You
It
had
was purely
generals in those
political.
wars that got political. I mean, MacArthur clearly.
The doctor.
Yeah, okay,
He was a political military guy. He was all about the fame
right.
and glory.
But like a prime example of towards the end of that war, we had people coming into the roles that had political personalities and mindsets and were looking to affect it. Like Eisenhower having been a general before. I guess I go back to we've had a lot of leaders in our political landscape that have been military, right? Like our first president was the leader of the Continental Army. It's something that we've had for a very long time, but the shift has been pre joining service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Washington was not a particularly political fellow beforehand. He didn't want to be a politician for much of the time. At least as, we laymen in history guy tell me about it if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but it seemed like he wasn't exactly looking for the mantle of leadership of the country, and was hesitant to continue serving that role, and that's why we have term limits.
Yeah, he was pressured by the founding fathers to become the president because it was the way how they are pretty much saying, well, if you don't become president, we'll end up having another king, or the republic
Right?
will fall apart. So,
And that was a wise decision by them at the time, and it made sense, and it worked out.
mm-hmm.
Since then, I think we've had more and more of a trend towards getting politicized prior to leaving the service, and then you get MacArthur's and you get Petraeus's, and to not get down the rabbit hole of generals that have done dumb things, these individuals have been supported by a JAG Corps throughout time that has allowed for more politically inclusive decisions that haven't focused on, is this in the best interest of the service for the fighting of wars. The Judge
Yeah,
Advocate General should be focused on primarily keep the force healthy by eliminating those that break the laws, can't maintain the good order and discipline, advise commands so as to keep the scope of punishments within reasonableness so that we don't lose good people who screw up, but we eliminate bad behaviors, and make sure that our orders and regulations as far as the good order and discipline and training are legal and constitutional, that we are, again, keeping the health of the force. This is where training guidelines come into play, where, like, over the years, we've made training safer so that command teams don't push our warfighters into such a state of disrepair because they're trying to get that bullet, make the slide green or whatever, that they have limitations that will protect our force. Those kind of
mm-hmm.
things. Those are the good of JAG that should be utilized to preserve the force. So all of that to say, like that's my opinion, but the dedicated mission, right? What Army Regulation 27-1 says about JAG under Chapter 3, the mission. The Judge Advocate Legal Service supports the total Army mission by administering the military justice system and providing other quality legal services that meet the highest professional standards. TJAG is responsible for developing and executing plans and programs across the full spectrum of legal disciplines, including those described in paragraph 2-1 of this regulation. And so that it's primarily that administering the justice system and providing other services to meet highest standards in supporting the total Army mission, right? The first portion is the most important. It's supporting the total Army mission. Having the military justice system, providing other quality legal services, executing plans and programs, it's all great. It's to support the total Army mission. And so I hope the jets overhead don't sound too loud, but hey, Air Force. There's so many functions of that we didn't get into. There's so many little programs. JAG tells the commander whether or not they can use, fundraising from MWR events for X, Y, or Z, right? Like that's little
Mm-hmm.
stuff that is just keep the command out of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't relevant to this conversation for the most part, but it's all to support the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue those little things, keeping the command out of trouble with financial unions or banks or whatever, with MWR, that's to support morale, which supports the troops' health and well-being and their ability to fight. Every function of the JAG should be done through the scope of supporting the overall mission. And if there's another part of 21 that you think speaks more to that, I think it might be 2-1 listing every possible function, labor
Yeah.
council, legal assistant secretary of the Army for manpower,
Yes.
environmental, like it goes on and on.
Yes. So if you're interested into learning about what JAG does for the Army, look up AR 27-1 on armypubs.com. You just type it in there. It's available to the public. You don't need any type of access to get on it. It gives you everything, and it gives you each individual position that JAG do. very well detailed compared to a lot of the other positions in the military. Try to look for the other branches, can find them. So if you're a listener and you're in the Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, or Marine Corps, feel free to attach a link to y'all's doctrine for the JAG if you want, for others to take a look. If they're interested, for those who are interested in joining the JAG and they want to determine which branch is best fit for them. It's kind of the purpose of this too, just to reinforce this is not to completely discourage people from joining the military. It's also kind of educate people about the military as well.
I would hope that this would encourage people to join up with the intent of fixing the problems, right? We need America, the services, honestly, just humans in general. We need people that hear that and say, I want to change that. I want to do it right. And for some, that may be a lifelong aspiration because it may take quite a long time. Or maybe that would encourage you to get into politics and change it from the making law side.
I will say this.
Yeah.
I will say this is that right at this moment, there's not enough people that are like us that are in or were in that could make that change. And in this current moment, those who are high up that have the ability to get rid of individuals, they're going to try to weed you out. It's kind of what happened to us. So the more people that we can get in that want to make change, eventually those bad weeds they'll get. So it's a long process, but that's just a forewarning. They're going to try and weed you out.
And so, with that knowledge, be that level of good that they can't, because the system may be imperfect, it may have some corruption, but there are ways to get through, and there are enough people out there that want to see change that someone's going to make it through. It's what discouraged me most was seeing leaders above me get away with things that junior soldiers and airmen and whatnot could not. And then, having the book thrown at them. If that never happens to you, then you have the chance. If it happens to you and you can bear it, then we still need them. We still, it sounds crappy to say, but sometimes it's going to take the sacrifice of somebody to do the work. That should be encouraging for the person that's already there.
Yeah.
That there's a light at the end of some tunnel. So I do want to highlight that the JAG Corps actually has what looks to be a sponsored .mil site talking about the Quill and Sword. That's a podcast done by JAG members that I will share in the description of this episode. I'm going to check it out. I haven't actually gotten the time to get behind and look into some of them, but just looking at the descriptions, I'm kind of interested to see. There's one called Hold My Regs, and I'm real interested in listening to that one.
So let's talk about what we mentioned earlier in the episode, the different types of JAG. So we really kind of beat with the dead horse, the being legalized as commander. So going back to SJA, again, those are the guys that advise any military personnel on any matter. So I remember going in there one time and a soldier was dealing with a custody battle. So they'll help you with that. I remember one time a veteran actually was getting help on a will. So they'll help with veterans too. I don't know the whole process with that. On that, I think you have to be retired to be able to get assistance from them. But even if it's like you're an officer, again, using them as a sample, and you're in charge of a football, you'll go to SJA and you'll ask for assistance like, hey, how do I go about dealing with this football? And SJA will help out through the process, like, hey, this you need to do this or that, and so on. Also, say like you're a soldier and you're going through Article 15 proceeding, or well, not proceedings. You're under investigation, and there's a possibility of an Article 15. They just haven't given you the pending Article 15, what is called adverse action flag. You can go SJA and they can give you legal advice. So that's something that they can do for you as well. Now, once you do receive that Article 15, they can't assist you anymore. Now, this is the tricky part with SJA that is very frustrating I dealt with myself. So say like someone accused you, say, let's just say harassment, and that individual goes to SJA for assistance, and you go into SJA. The base SJA will say, "Oh, we can't help you because we're helping them now." Even though they have like 3 or 4 or 5 officers, for some reason they just won't. So you only have 2 options at that point: either not get any type of legal advice, or you have to pay a lawyer off post. So that's one of their flaws. Probably the most noticeable flaw. Other than that, SJA is pretty good. You have anything?
For SJA and flip pools and you know, Article 15 procedures, not really. I mean, I think you covered the majority of it. They facilitate these things, support. I think there's a constant geared towards protecting the unit and the commander more than the soldier and service member.
That's
That's
the
with
it's the
that's
SJA at division that he's referring to.
yeah. It now obviously there's the defense guys that are supposed to support the service member soldier, but like for the most part, I agree with Red Leg on all of it. It's just that's what they do. It's what they're there to support.
Then you have Child Defense Service and the Army, and I'm going to guess is also called that in the Air Force. I couldn't find any type of information on the Air Force. So if you're in the Air Force or we're in the Air Force, feel free to comment exactly what your else legal process is. TDS is another name for it. They deal with your legal proceedings. So once you get that Article 15 slapped on you, or you're going through court martial proceedings and all that, that's your defense. Now, on the Navy side, they call it Defense Service Office, or TSO. That's also the same for the Marines, since they fall underneath the same department. So again, TDS, they deal with all that stuff, separations, chapters, anything that is defense. They can be hit or miss. It just depends on your case. If it doesn't lead to a court martial, there's not so much that they could do. If they have evidence against you, there's not really much they could do other than just kind of like make you beg. Just like say, I'm sorry, blah, blah, and all that stuff. Even if the story that they have written up, the army that is incorrect. I mean, you could provide an example if you want on that. Now, once if there is a court martial, they can start acting like an attorney. They can, bring witnesses and all that stuff, even if you did do something wrong and all that, they can still come and throw your evidence out there and your support and all this other stuff. It's a completely different ballpark in that case. It just depends on how your case goes. Is it court martial or not? Or is it board of inquiry or not?
Yeah. Well, and for all the young service members out there that might hear this podcast, please don't listen to your best friend in the barracks, your quote unquote barracks lawyer, and ask for a court martial when it's non-judicial punishment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so, this one drives me up a wall. And for our listeners that don't know, and we can get into the military legal justice system another time on individual punishments and what some of these terms that we're throwing around mean. But with NJP, you are honestly better off just taking the punishment that it is, whether it be cut and pay, lack of leave, or extra duty, or whatever, than asking for a freaking court martial.
Yeah.
Now, you might just have a point if it is something stupid, right? I think everyone's watched Band of Brothers out there. There's the point where David Schwimmer's character tells Lieutenant Winters, hey, your guy, what was it? Is it not cleaning the latrines or something stupid?
Yeah.
And he was going to be like, you're not going to have pass for X, Y, or Z. And he was like, okay, I demand a court martial. And it's that like power move of you wouldn't dare take that to the commander. You're not gonna waste his time with that BS, and it's BS. Okay, fine. If any commander is stupid enough to go that far with something silly, then maybe demanding a court martial where applicable,
Mm-hmm.
will help you out of it. But you know what's not
Yeah.
going to happen? You're not going to have the Lieutenant Winters moment of, huh, I just succeeded. This is going to go
Yeah.
well for me. Like, what's going to happen is your command team's going to crap all over you for however long. So, like,
And
think
it took
about it.
forever.
Truly think about it. You're going to be stuck with them for however long. It's not worth it. It's just main point being, JAG does these court martials, does these legal proceedings, does, and advises the command team on NJP and Article 15 type hearings. That does not mean that you need to get JAG involved on every little thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's better to just eat crow and move on.
Yeah. I know, like, from my situation, like, well, as I mentioned earlier, JAGs has moved constantly. I had several different JAGs because it just kept on getting reassigned. But they all said it was a good court martial. I'll tear apart the case because of the fact that there was just so many discrepancies regarding the sworn statement and all that. And the evidence that I had just did not fit. But anyways, like, that's the reason why. It would have been a completely different story. But again, don't want to go to a court martial because, again, it's a very long process, and two, it is just in case they roll against you, the outcome is far worse than the outcome if they roll against you in a non-court martial proceeding. Whereas, like, say, in a non-court martial proceeding, the worst outcome would be honorable discharge but separation, administrative separation. But if you were to do the court martial, the worst outcome would have been a general discharge other than honorable. I mean, that's a worse outcome. I mean, you're taking a gamble at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you, this episode's, mostly about JAG. What is it? JAG, what do they do? We've covered quite a bit of it, but it's just I want our listenership to know this is not all encompassing. We're speaking to the Army because we understand Army, but like there's so much because the system is so large now that involves JAG. Like you can't sneeze at the command level without talking to your JAG about it. They're so into everything. Going back to all the turmoil and change that's going on, the Hegseth is cracking down on these JAG officers and commanders and generals of X, Y, and Z nature because they're all part of the same. They're so intricately involved. In order to get real change in the military right now, JAG is like the kind of like the immune system or one of the glands in the body pumping into the body effects that lead us in a direction or make us more prone to this or that. Removing those that stand on politics is going to help in the long run. It's going to help with the little policies, with flipples, AR-15. It is going to help tremendously to revamp, and that is to get JAG focused back on supporting the force and the mission, the warfighter, and not the political spectrum that we sit in.
Yeah, and that is the thing, is that the number one mission of the military is to fight and win our nation's wars. And if you pay attention to anything that these generals are saying, the memorandums that they're putting out, their policies that they're putting out, a lot of it is political statements. Always, you can tell that their number one priority is not to try and ensure that our soldiers are fit and ready for combat when that possibility comes. We keep on talking about Russia. We keep on talking about China. We keep on talking about Iran. I don't think people honestly understand how close a war with those three are, especially Iran and Russia. And some of these senior leaders, their priorities seems to be on politics. And when I talk about politics, I'm talking about like DEI and all this other stuff. Yeah, the army is supposed to be inclusive and all this other stuff, but the number one priority should always be, as Secretary Hesketh keeps on saying, lethality. The lethality of the military should not be sacrificed to ensure other things are being pushed through and all those. So if lethality is being weakening as we've been seeing, and as we can say for sure, when we just recently got out of the military, is happening. It is not a good thing. These individuals who are pushing some of these agendas, they need to leave. We can have guys who want to probably push for equality and all this other stuff, but they cannot be willing to sacrifice the well-being and the lethality of the soldiers and the units for some of these political agendas.
Well, guys, that's our episode on JAG. I know we didn't cover everything under the sun, and there's plenty more in AR 27-1 to hit. We'd love to have your comments, and as always, if you agree, disagree, have experience from other services, we're looking for any input, and we encourage comments. We'll interact with you. But this has been our latest episode of The Brass and the Truth.